we are going to have a very long talk on the road about genre as you search us a new place and pay for some home fire insurance. Also, you're driving, I can't drive. What? What? I still have a video to do. Did you just go? Okay, hit the gas. Oh, no opening movie this time, I guess. Huh. Oh my god. Magical Drop. It's a puzzle series that does do a lot of the things that I really enjoy in gaming in general. But never did I think that love was going to be tested. Magical Drop 5 first released in 2012, published by UTV Ignition Entertainment. You might have played one of their other published games like Metal Slug by SNK. Actually, it seems they published a lot of SNK's games. Data East, a company so filled with potential gems it hurts to think about, they went ahead and created a brand new team to develop Magical Drop F. But this time, we have another brand new team, and Data East is in the dust, buried 6 feet under, or rather however many times deep a corporation has to be considered buried. Golgoth now takes center stage as the hot new devs on the block to sculpt that shiny new Magical Drop. And Golgoth, being a fresh face, taking on a license that hasn't been used in nearly a decade is a pretty smart move, I feel. It is assumed that the property for Magical Drop must have been bought by Golgoth Studio a couple years earlier or even further back. According to a Digital Spy interview with one of the game design directors, Anthony Desaferrera, on the game Toki, Golgoth became a full-fledged studio in 2008, so within that year or after, they should have had dealings to obtain the Magical Drop property to make a sequel. The Digital Spy interview is actually pretty interesting because you don't normally hear about the struggles or challenges in obtaining a license. And while this interview does not touch on Magical Drop specifically, it does touch on some relevant information regarding Golgoth. This line here: "When I was searching the Toki licensor, I made contact with a Japanese company, Gmode. They informed me about IP rights, and Joe and Mac was one of them. After we showed our work on the Toki remake, they offered us to sign an agreement to develop a remake." I want you to keep that line snug in the back of your mind for later. But regardless, he also did this same kind of interview for a French website called The Player, which I think is actually a pretty fun sounding name. The Player. And website side questing, which is interesting because in this particular interview he actually expands on how they actually develop their games. The ideas and methods for creating a high definition quality 2D game wasn't as common during this time as it is nowadays. Despite these interviews though, I know that Golgoth actually closed down in 2016, and that game Toki wouldn't even release until 2018, but by a different developer who finished the game for release named Microids, though I never played Toki. So while I could not find a single interview regarding Magical Drop from Golgoth, these three provided some good background on the mindset of their director, as well as the sheer passion they seem to have for their projects, despite the very few they managed to release. Magical Drop 5 only released on Windows PCs through Valve's Steam storefront, and while they did have plans to release a console version on the Xbox 360, those plans did not pan out. By this point in time, it had been about a decade since the last Magical Drop game, Magical Drop F, and that's primarily just for Japanese players. Players were living in the age of HD gaming now, and genre focus has shifted dramatically since the PlayStation and Dreamcast days. In the year 2012 alone, you had big hits like Borderlands 2, Mass Effect 3, Far Cry 3, and The Walking Dead, clearly showing that storytelling has become an even larger focus within gaming. However, as always, before we jump into the game that is Magical Drop 5, let's look at who our developers are this time. We have the producers, Anthony Desaferrera, who was the speaker in those interviews, and Paulo Desaferrera, maybe a relative? Then Alex Naihiro Kameda, who was a global brand manager for Gmode for 5 years from 2005 to 2010, handling the Data East properties for mobile. And he had managed multiple game and mobile studios as well, and today managing Jugo Mobile. And Kazuki Kato, who I actually could not find anything on. The game design directors are Anthony DeSafera and Alex Kameda. The main programmers are Malik Bengugum, who has quite the extensive history of works and achievements on his plate, dating back to Ubisoft in the late 90s, programming gameplay to develop the engine Golgoth Studio would use for their games, and today, he's the 3D graphics programming director under Ubisoft Paris for Beyond Good and Evil 2. The dude is basically a beast when it comes to building the game foundation. And lastly, we have Mywin Rapine, who I could not find anything about. VFX programmers Eric Gakshon and Paul Suchanek, with additional programming from Dimitri Peen, who, while during the time of this game had only done 2 projects, Jump for Xbox 360 and Hell Yeah, Wrath of the Dead Rabbit. He would go on to do many more within the mobile markets like Assassin's Creed Pirates on Android and the Mighty Quest for Epic Loot on iPhone. The last project he's credited is Might and Magic Chess Royale for Android in 2020. 2D artists were Aurelian Regard. Now that is actually a surprising name to see here. While I could not find any projects he had worked on before Magical Drop, there were some after, and they are no doubt games you might have seen when browsing any of the digital online storefronts. Games like Away, Journey to the Unexpected, which is a very neat little indie game by the way, and he is currently working under NanoPico Games with 2 other developers. NanoPico had made games like PictoQuest, The Cursed Grids. Philip DeSoli, the guy creates very memorable art in all the projects he has been a part of, working all the way back since 1989 with Ocean Software, with games like Toki. He would go on to be primarily a freelance artist, and was even able to work on UFO Robo Grendizer, which was an anime and manga that he was a huge fan of since his youth. That didn't air outside the US till 1980, on something called Force 5? The odd thing about this though is that despite his excellent track record and all the information I can find on his work, I can't find anything for Magical Drop 5. And even in the in-game credits he is listed as just a 2D artist. Then there's Charles Duchess and Ivan Boivin, who was a key animator for Magical Drop 5, and it seems Magical Drop 5 was his first released game project in his career. Most recently, he was a key animator for Asterix and Obelix. Slap them all. Engine programmer was Malik Bengugum. Tools programmer was Vladimir or Vladimiros Papaditsas. And this would be only his second project among the many he partakes in the future. He is currently a full-stack engineer for Monix Group Inc. Character animators were Aiko Morita, Miki Eto, and Keiicho Ando, who has done previous animation work for the game PlayStation Move Ape Escape. Huh. I forgot that they made an Ape Escape game for the PlayStation Move. Wow. Now for the composers of the music. They were Sammy Sam Chaboob, good old Gamadelic. There was an orchestrator and arranger, which was also Sammy Chaboob. Musicians were Faye Kao Chaboob and David Sultani. The credited guitarist David Sultani has done other games as well. Before Magical Drop 5, he actually worked on a couple DS games like Motor Racer DS and Hotel Giant DS. And after Magical Drop 5, he worked on Rayman Legends in 2013. I wonder if he's the guy responsible for those crazy guitar riffs in that game. Because I remember the guitar moments in Rayman Legends being really freaking cool. Now for the voice actors, which unfortunately is a small list, and they are also all new. Voice actors were Mayumi Sindo, who doesn't seem to have any other projects I could find that she's in. Yui Ogura, who has done a crap ton of projects. Her very first credited role is a character named Paul Janice Labwitz from Phantasy Star Online 2. She maintains the role of the character Rom, one of the White Sisters within the Hyperdimension Neptunia games. She is also the voice of Erika Mishima in Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. Today, she is still doing voice work for Phantasy Star Online 2. though I assume it's New Genesis, as her second crediting for the game was listed in 2020, which was the release year of New Genesis. She's also going to reprise her role as Ram, White Sister, in Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters. Hiroka Nishizawa has played Amoretta in the game Grim Grimoire for PlayStation 2, which, by the way, has a remaster out now on the Switch, in 2007 before working on Magical Drop 5, and after that, she is credited with voice work from the games Bravely Default and Bravely Second. Tomoki Shimada only has one game after Magical Drop 5, and that is Kinkoi Golden Love Reach in 2017, which is an adult romance visual novel. And say what you will, off of first impressions, the game has some near perfect scoring reception for its players. I guess these developers really know what their players want.
Which is sex.
And lastly, Shogo Himuga. Yeah, not many voice actors compared to last time. And now for the gameplay of Magical Drop 5. To be totally honest with you, I don't really know what I was expecting. Magical Drop 3 more or less nailed the formula and has mechanical depth and skill levels that have kept it alive and well to this day among many players. And Magical Drop F provided an interesting spin to this series by offering more customization for the player, as well as extending the single player experience beyond what is normally offered. So where does that leave Magical Drop 5? To put it bluntly, it's a feeling of one step forward but two steps back. Right as you press start on the title screen, you are shown the game modes, and it's kind of immediately apparent what I meant. This time there is really only one main mode in the game, which is the story mode. This is similar in design and structure to previous Magical Drop games like 2 and 3. It even separates them by difficulty the same way, even down to making the easy mode be the difficulty where you primarily fight the cast of Magical Drop 1, with the world being the final encounter. Beating the story mode with a character unlocks their ending and profile in the gallery menu, where character profiles, endings, and their voice lines will appear. Some of these are pretty entertaining to read. Like, the Empress likes what? However, this is about all that is actually unlockable besides characters, which have some pretty high and difficult requirements unless you do a lot of practice or have a lot of patience. Other than the story mode, we have the battle mode, which is more or less the versus mode, or battling with the CPU. You can also play any new characters in this mode, as the characters you unlock do not receive their own story mode. This is two steps back if you ask me, as the game now has less engagement with its systems for players to grapple. The survival and puzzle modes may have never been competitively played, but they were very useful in building up a player's skill within the game's systems. However, the one step forward, there is the online mode, which unfortunately is useless as of this video since the game itself is delisted and cannot be bought on any digital storefront, meaning support for online play is a foregone conclusion, and as in, it doesn't exist. No community of players can really grow when the game is actively removed from being sold for anyone to buy and play. However, that is not a total loss as far as the player experience is concerned. But in terms of preservation, it is a pretty awful situation. Thankfully, enough players have done work to back the game up to preserve it for those looking to give it a go or are interested in what it had to offer the series. Something interesting to note is that this entry of Magical Drop can actually have up to 4 players battling simultaneously, which I can only imagine is a chaotic mess online, but a fun mess nonetheless.
Which is sex.
As for the core gameplay, not much has changed. This game has a lot more in common with Magical Drop 3 than it does F. As a matter of fact, I am pretty sure the story presented acts as if F just doesn't exist. Which is fine, as it was a Japanese-only released game, though calling the game Magical Drop 5 implies F is in fact 4, right?
F is 4.
Shut up, boss. No, it's not. You still play by the same rules as before, where you pick up and throw drops to create patterns of 3 to burst into a chain to push the ceiling down on your opponent. The quota rule is also still in full effect, as well. I do love that this time they actually show the player what the drop pattern for each character is, though it does not show any other special properties the character may be capable of. But after playing each character's story mode, I would say the drop pattern is the only difference between them. Ice and bubble blocks once again make a return, but they are also again the only special blocks that appear within the game, unless you count the burst bomb block that bursts all of one color on the board. Now that is all well and good if we are strictly talking about the Magical Drop 5 core gameplay. But this entry of the series has something really unique that even predates the Puyo vs. Tetris idea. The game features gameplay from the arcade game Ghost Lop. Ghost Lop was an arcade game where you controlled one of two brothers who hunted and busted ghosts. The gameplay of Ghost Lop is similar to Bubble Bobble, where you have to direct and aim a ball, or in this case a fireball, towards the other ghosts, which are like the drops. Ghosts come in two colors, red and blue, and you want to bust them by matching the same color. You can swap the color of your fireball at will, and before or after throwing it. The ghosts are connected together like the marbles would be in Bubble Bobble, which means busting one near the root of a line of connecting ghosts will bust all of them instead of just the one. The Ghost Lopper has the ability to move on the board left and right, like the clown does, which is useful for catching the fireball as it bounces back towards the floor. Every time the fireball hits the floor though, that counts as a penalty against the Ghost Lopper, so you have to bust all the ghosts without letting the fireball touch the floor. While this is actually pretty sick, I ended up finding the gameplay of the Ghost Lopper very slow and clunky to use, but I also found the gameplay surprisingly unengaging and lacking the excitement Magical Drop is known for. It never feels like I'm actually outpacing or outsmarting my opponent because the gameplay feels so far removed from what is actually happening with the battle. I never know exactly how I won, and whenever I lose, it's usually because I hit the floor too many times. So while it's definitely a unique idea, it's clear to me it takes a lot of understanding of both puzzler mechanics and the strengths of those mechanics to properly pit them against each other for a versus puzzler. Puyo Puyo vs. Tetris clearly understands this enough to make it fun and clear to players how the match is going, and provided the necessary options and changes to make the gameplay engaging between both puzzler modes, while also educating the player on each mode's strengths to keep an eye on and weaknesses to exploit. I guess it also doesn't really help that there are only 3 Ghost Lopper characters in the game, so their gameplay was never really conceptualized to a level like that of Puyo vs. Tetris, where both gameplay modes are given the same amount of attention within the package as a whole. They could have probably made this into a crossover spin-off instead of a mainline entry if they really wanted to.
Magical Drop. The Emperor's got locked by a ghost.
Visually, I think the battles do look nice. They have that color-popping look that 2 and 3 had, although aesthetically, the game reminds me of Magical Drop 2 more than any other entry. And while I may not have been the biggest fan of the art style Magical Drop F, I did grow to like it quite a lot as I played it. For this one, however, I cannot say the art style ever grew on me. The characters feel less alive than they did before, and it's not that the animation is less frames or less quality, but I think it has more to do with the style itself. It has this, limiting expression on the characters within the game. They all feel very static and stiff compared to their early sprite work. Even compared to their 2D animated appearance in F, they feel far less alive. Now I get it, believe me, making animated movement look alive is not easy, especially if you never dabbled in animating. And while the art does look good for what it is, it just doesn't deliver on what you would expect the first high-definition Magical Drop game to have after a decade. One issue that I do have with the visuals is that chaining drops can cause enough effects on your board that you can actually have difficulty even seeing what you're doing. Previous game modes made sure to have effects that didn't obscure your vision or were just out of the playing field. But here it's right on top of where you are clearing drops during a match. It's crazy. One other thing about the game that really stuck out to me during my time with it was how out of whack the characters are. Their dialogue seems at times incomplete, or could use another draft, or even a pass from an editor. Hi, Star. Okay. Oh, we're just gonna fight then. Okay. I know Magical Drop isn't exactly known for their clean localizations, but you would hope that by this point in time that wasn't an issue. The characters seem like caricatures of what they used to be. What? Are we really about to beat a child up for that? Again! She does it again! And Golgoth even went and wrote anything, seemingly, for these character profiles? Including names that they were never once called before? The story itself seems to be just another tournament of some kind, but I can barely piece that together with everything the game explains to you, which is almost nothing. Although it does try to include the Ghost Lop characters into the story, even including their villain, who seems to be in cahoots with the Empress, based on the very vague dialogue the game offers. To be fair, the game was not some premium priced release game, and it's clear the game also did not have the budget necessary to match its previous entries. And this was developed by a small team, although that is less of an issue as the previous game teams were also pretty small. Regardless, looking at the circumstances and the overall context of Golgoth as a game development studio, Magical Drop 5 is just sadly below average as a puzzler experience. Not because of the lack of modes, the lack of characters, or even the current dead online mode, but because the game is also just buggy. Graphical bugs like text windows or even effects stop appearing, random crashes, and sometimes corrupt save data are all bugs that can occur during play, and I've experienced all of them. I'm also playing the latest version of the game that ever released, and according to my research, the team had promised future patches for these problems, but they just never occurred. Looking at their situation later, having to close down and even unable to fully release what is probably considered their biggest project, Toki, on their own, the game just didn't have what it needed to succeed and survive. Now, we do not know why the game was delisted, or if anything behind the scenes was going on, but normally, a game is delisted for legal reasons or quality reasons, and Magical Drop 5 can technically fulfill both of these requirements with its license expiration, studio collapse, and buggy release. Okay, well, I do have a little bit of a theory here. Remember that line I mentioned early on? Golgoth was acquiring licenses to make games, and it seems more likely to me that Magical Drop was just a license not being used by anyone, and starting off making games with some lesser known IPs has been proven to work before. But if that's the case, it kind of gives the idea that Magical Drop was not necessarily a project they had initial interest in. Especially when you consider all the media material on Golgoth relates to Toki, which was clearly their primary project, as it seems to be the only one given the most attention and coverage before release. And it's the main game I keep finding when I search for them all over the internet. I went into Magical Drop 5 expecting to hate it just from everything I have heard people say about it. But the reality is that I had a lot of fun playing it, because the core gameplay is still solid, when it's all working. The problem for me personally is that there's just not enough here to keep me playing it over any of the previous games, and its bugs can become a hindrance to normal gameplay in general. However, I will say the music is probably the best thing about the game, because boy oh boy do those themes frickin' slap. Now, before I close the curtain on this game, a viewer who goes by Zenithian, nice name, is that a Dragon Quest reference? They had sent me some fascinating information on the original artist for Magical Drop 1. Evidently, Sukapan has a website that when you go there, it will display a random portrait of a character in the same aesthetic style that Magical Drop 1 sported. They were the same artist after all. This is quite a gem of a find. Each character being displayed on the website is rocking that tarot card format the games all thematically surround themselves around. 7 of these characters are directly from Magical Drop, while the rest are original designs for the many tarot cards that Magical Drop typically has. I end up liking some of these designs over the official designs for the same tarot cards, while some I still prefer the game's official design. Like, I love how this design of Justice here really leans in on the concept.
Like she wholly embodies what justice truly is, and is preparing herself for battle.
Uttering small prayers beneath the hilt of her blade. Having said that, the ones I'm not too big on are ones like Judgment, where the character clearly fits the tarot, like the theme of judgment, but that Magical Drop factor is just totally gone. You know, like that element where some of these characters couldn't be any further from the tarot card they represent. That is very clearly missing from this. Like, Empress here fits perfectly. But is it an improvement?
In my eyes, no.
Either way, this is a wonderful find. And that is Magical Drop 5. Yes, Pops? What's this? Magical Drop 6. Oh. A year of updates? Okay. Well, I mean, I'll just say it here. Guys, I will be covering Magical Drop 6 after all the updates are done. However, that won't mean my look at it will not include how its game launch is handled, since I do have that personal experience. But until then, I'll see you all with whatever I come up with next, which will be something totally different. You won't even hear my voice in it, but you will hear something. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye!
Which is sick.